You're listening to On the Docket with Napoli Shkolnik.
Good morning. It's another episode of On the Docket here at Napoli Shkolnik. I'm Hunter Shkolnik. I'm one of the partners of the firm. We have here today Chris Schnieders, who's our partner based out of Kansas City. And he's going to be talking about a really amazing success on his part at trial recently in a unique kind of case that most people probably never hear about. It's called FELA, Federal Employers Liability Act, where he represented a railroad worker and had an amazing result. And we have the opportunity today to talk about this case, about the strengths, the weaknesses, how we went about trying the case, or how he went about trying the case, and how he ended up with an amazing result that, really caused shockwaves through the railroad business, since they now know that they have a law firm ready to take them to task. Good morning, Chris. It's really nice to have you here today. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell the audience about you and your practice?
Absolutely. Thank you, Hunter. So I came to our firm about 7 years ago. I'm the lone partner in flyover country over in Kansas City. But as you know, we have a national practice, so we work everywhere.
We prefer to call it the Heartland.
Of course, the Heartland, absolutely. But it's been a pleasure being a part of such an amazing firm. And I would say, before I introduce myself, trial results like this don't happen without incredible mentors. And yourself, Paul, being able to see how you try cases and what you've done has been an absolute just epiphany in how I've handled cases. So it's important to note that we have to recognize the people that got us to where we were and have led to results that we've been able to obtain.
Oh, appreciate that.
So I'm from Kansas City, and so I have kind of a different perspective on some of these areas of law than maybe some other people do. You find in different areas of the country that things are tried a little bit differently.
That's an understatement.
Yeah,
Having tried cases in different parts of the country that were so different than New York.
Absolutely. So I've been a partner with us for about 7 years at this point, and been able to get some good results. Although this one for the Redfords that we're going to talk about here in a little bit was really special. It was something that we were able to bring home for this family, and to really put a point as to what rail workers go through and what they're exposed to.
It's interesting you say that. And we were just talking before we started filming about not talking about war stories, and we generally don't like to dwell on them. But I like you, I had, through your career, you come across a case like this, like yours. I had one involving an airplane crash, and I was representing the family of really just good people. And, everyone thought the case was crazy, you'll never win it, and we ended up with a huge verdict out in Arizona. And, sometimes you have a case where you realize you're representing good people, they were wronged, and you're going to do whatever it takes, within the bounds of the law to succeed for them. And your result here, to me, rang that in my head of when I tried that airplane case out in California, that you took something that was, and we'll get into the details more, but you have a multi-pack a day smoker for his whole life, virtually, who develops cancer, and you were able to successfully establish that it wasn't just his cigarette smoking, but it was also the fact that the railroads just don't care about their employees, and they don't provide the safety that they require. And you did such an amazing job on that. So let me start off with, I want to throw out a few questions and get you to talk to the audience about it. FELA, what is it? Really, just, it's a unique area of the law. Just tell us about it, please.
Absolutely. So FELA is an area. It's the Federal Employers Liability Act. It's something that was statutorily enacted at a federal level around the turn of the century, so around the 1903 in that time frame. It was put in place because you had an area of work where workers were traditionally exploited, frankly. They were basically ground down to the bone, and left basically after their time with the railroad with a broken body, a broken psyche, everything else that went along with that. So the government stepped in and said, we've got to put a stop to this. We need to put some protections in place for this particular industry because of what they undergo. And so that was really, when you traditionally look at the time when we were expanding west, the time when our rails were building out all the way to California from the East Coast, the workers that built those rails, it was built on their backs. And they would get through their lives and just be, at a very young age, very, very decimated by what they had undergone.
Well, in fact, didn't they also just bury them along the way? And many of them never even made it, out at the end of their work life.
I mean, it would shock our conscience to see some of the ways that workers were treated over time. And this statutory construct was put into place in order to protect those workers. But the problem is that without people like ourselves, like us, that are willing to go and use that statutory construct and try to help these people, it just goes unrung. That bell will sit there, but until you actually use it and pick up the gong and actually hit it, it's just going to sit there as an unused tool. FELA is, in my mind, a very unused tool with as it regards workers and worker safety.
Which is really what it was designed for. That was the whole purpose of the statute and all the regulations. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Yet
Absolutely.
we're not seeing it in the courtroom as much as it should. Is that really what you're suggesting?
I just don't see it used near as often as it needs to be, because you traditionally have a group of workers that still, even with this construct put into place, are worked very, very hard. They're put in very dangerous situations. And as a result of that, they deal with lifelong sequelae, whether that's their bodies breaking down, whether that's cancers like we saw with Rock that we're going to talk about here. You have a lot of very toxic exposures over time that we're seeing. And whereas maybe traditionally, when we're talking about the turn of the century over 120 years ago, we were looking at people that were physically broken, we're now seeing people that are decimated by treatments related to exposures that they have, by death and other sequelae that result from all of that. And so it's an area that people just tend in that world to think that's just the way of the world. That's how things happen to people like us. And what I would say to those people is, that's not what this is about. That's not for you. You deserve a safe workplace, and that's what this statutory construct is for.
Now, you mentioned how it's changed over time. I mean, we can go into the 1800s, early 1900s, while they were still laying that track. I'm sure most of the problems in those days were the physical injuries. They were getting crushed. They were overworked, laying the track, redoing the track, and things like that. And obviously, I'm sure some of that still occurs now. But you have these machines that lay the track. It's, you're no longer doing it on the back of the worker. But I guess, and I think you pointed out that now you're seeing the exposures. I can only imagine the amount of toxic chemicals and other toxic substances that are utilized every day by these workers, or maybe not even utilized, but used where the worker has to be. Now, is that also something that we could utilize the FELA statutory and regulatory process in order to get compensation for the railroad workers, or is it just you had to literally be working with the chemical yourself?
No, and it's a great point, Hunter. The issue is that when you're in proximity to these toxic substances, you are exposed. You at that point have a cognizable exposure, excuse me, to a substance that causes your body harm. We always say, and I've heard you say this before in speaking, that the law is faster than science oftentimes. And so we have to wait for science to catch up. We are, I wouldn't call it a golden age, but we're in a time now where science has caught up to some of the exposure risk that we have, where we can understand, if you're standing, for instance, with Mr. Redford in diesel exhaust all day, 8 hours a day over the course of a 38-year career, that's something that is causing you damage. That's something that is absolutely causing risk of cancer and causing risk of other issues that you'll have as you go along.
Well, in addition to that, aren't many of these workers using things like acetone, benzene, other type of solvents, hydrocarbons well, virtually on an everyday basis, while they're working the trains?
Absolutely. So the rail industry, when you think about everything that goes into it, you're talking about, from the people that are actually driving the cars themselves, people that are loading the cars, people that are building the tracks, the people that are maintaining the tracks, because that's a huge part of what the rail industry does as well. All of that involves a lot of exposures that your typical person just going through their day-to-day life is not going to be anywhere near. These are substances like benzene, which frankly is largely what the diesel exhaust exposure becomes. Things like benzene, things like creosote, things like other chemicals.
Like creosote, like that black that we see on the old wood railroad ties. That
Absolutely.
So all those miles and miles and miles of the wood that they're now removing and replacing with concrete. So every time they're moving that, they're rubbing themselves in cancer-causing chemicals.
They're rubbing on this tar-like substance that's there, where it's causes cancer in and of itself. If you or I went and touched one of those, that's not going to necessarily be an exposure that's going to affect us. But if you're doing that on a daily basis, and in the process of pulling this out, you're also getting it into the air where you can breathe it in, then it becomes a very toxic environment. And if you're not providing those workers with things like respirators or other mechanisms that are going to keep clean air available for them, you're going to get them sick. There's just no question about that.
I remember, you don't really see it as much today because now when they remove those old creosote railroad ties, they stack them and take them away to somewhere. But they used to see them burning, at the side of the rail yards, and how about that? I mean, these workers, and they're having their own little burn pits, that it's cheaper for the company to burn the stuff instead of disposing of and then exposing the employees. How about that? Is that something that would fit?
Absolutely. Anytime you're doing something like that, and it's very poignant that you would bring that up, Hunter, because when you think about the way things were taken care of in 1960 or 1970 compared to how they're taken care of today, they've come a long way in how they understand that they need to deal with these substances. But most of the workers that we see in the rail industry are lifers. They're somebody that they start sometime around high school age, if not a little bit older than that, and they work their entire career in that industry. And so they've seen many iterations of how these substances are handled. Some better than others, but still, even as we see today, the exposures and the way that these things are diminished is not up to par in most instances.
Now, Napoli Shkolnik, this area is, this FELA area. Is this something that you see us going forward in the future? I mean, do you see this as, where we should be focusing our efforts? Because there's only so many places you can go with your resources. But in terms of being able to help people and help people who have been injured, what's your thoughts about, the future and this area of the law?
I think that this area of the law is ripe for a little bit of a revolution, for lack of a better way of saying it. An area where you can help people that is not paid attention to quite as much as it needs to be. You and I would always tell people, and I would still say it today, we're trial attorneys. I can step in and try a case. You can step in and try a case based on the facts and do everything that's necessary for that client to make sure that they get the best case in front of the jury that they can. But in this particular area of the law, there are aspects of the law that allow for the plaintiff to get a little bit more ahead than they might in other areas. For instance, oftentimes we'll be in states where there's statutory bars if there's contributory negligence. We'll talk about the Redfords here in a moment because they're a phenomenal family, and I want to talk about them.
And that's an important issue in the Redmonds case.
Yeah.
But in general, this federal statutory program under FELA and its regulations, does that give the families or the employee himself or herself the ability to bring cases that they may not be able to bring in the state they live because the law is kind of is pushed to an area to protect an industry that the local government wants? So how does that interplay with the FELA statute and a case like the Redmond's case or any of these FELA cases.
Yeah, the Redfords, it's important in this one. It's important in all of them, frankly. Your point is it could not be stronger in this particular instance because the state of Virginia, where we tried this case, has a statute. It has a comparative fault statute.
What does that mean? Most of our listeners won't know.
That's true. That's true. So when you think about a case and you think about how someone might be blamed for their own injury to a certain point, that's what we think about as comparative fault. If you're talking about, say a car accident case, if you run a red light and then you get hit, then you're going to be hit with some sort of comparative fault by saying you were also at fault in addition to somebody else.
So wait a second. I could run through a light, go right through a red light and get in an accident and still blame the other person?
There are instances where you certainly could. It depends on the circumstances of every single case. You'd have to think about what was going on at the time. But clear-cut instance of that where you also would be at fault. In a state like Virginia, if you're even 1% at fault, so say 99% on the fault of the defendant and 1% on you, that would be a zero verdict right there, no matter what number you put up. And that's because of their specific law. Now, they're one of only 2 states that do that, but there's other ways that that's also diminished in different states. So juxtapose that with the fact that we tried this case in Virginia. The FELA statute is what we call pure comparative, which means that no matter what the percentages are, you get your percentage.
So, for example, if the employer is 95, like you used the example, like the car accident case, if it's 99% at fault and only 1% on you, you could actually recover the 99%. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Even though it's like such, you still have some involvement in this. It's something in your own lap that caused this.
Absolutely. And in FELA cases, this matters to a different degree than it does in a lot of other cases because in the rail industry, you have a large percentage of people that smoke. And that's, there's no judgment placed on that. It's just a fact. There are more people in the rail industry that smoke. Part of that was the timing. Like I said, a lot of these people work a long career in rail. So they started at a time when smoking was not as known to be a contributor to health concerns. But regardless, that's something that the defendants are going to try this case on every single time. And so it's important, and for instance, in our case, so Rock Redford was a 40-year smoker. He smoked 1 to 2 packs per day for 40 years.
So that's like almost a 80. Is that an 80-pack year smoker? It's 75 to 80 pack years.
I could show you slides.
I don't know that math, but I know it multiplies. So.
Well, I can tell you at trial that defendants took cigarettes and showed how far out on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge all the cigarettes he had smoked would go and how it would go back and forth to the moon, I think 4 times is what they decided. That's their entire case. They said, it's not our fault, it's his fault because this is what he did.
What was your job? I mean, how do you overcome someone smoking enough cigarettes that could go from one end of the Chesapeake Bridge to the other and back?
So it's not black and white like they want it to be. They want it to be a yes or no question. With FELA, what it allows us to do is make it a, shades of gray type of question. So in this instance, I didn't, when I talked to the jury, say there should be no fault placed whatsoever on Rock.
Well, you couldn't do that, could you? There had to be some. I mean, he smoked.
I mean, that's what the defendant did. The defendant said it's absolutely 100% unequivocally his fault for smoking, nothing to do with all these terrible exposures we give him.
Maybe that was a big mistake. Maybe if they would have accepted even 1%, they could have done a lot better.
I absolutely agree with you, but the problem is that defendants don't have that mindset. Defendants have the mindset that we did nothing wrong and we will fight you every step of the way.
On everything.
On everything. And without somebody backing you on these, you're going to be susceptible to everything there. He gave his entire adult life to this company, was a loyal contributor to this company, built the rails, maintained the rails, did everything he possibly could for this company the entire way through, fought through injuries, because, as we said, this does break down your body. He never asked for a penny from the company for the fact that his back was broke or anything else that went into that. But it wasn't until he developed acute myeloid leukemia, which is a particularly nasty leukemia.
And we're going to talk about Mr. Edmond in just a few more moments. Let me just follow up just one last area. about the FELA case and this type of argument by the defendants that blame blame the employee, and jury, don't even think about that there's federal laws that require us to provide a safe workplace.
Right.
Now, I can understand. I mean, I've been in enough, unfortunately or fortunately, I've been in a lot of trains. I used to commute for 16 years. And you get stuck in the yards, you see the workers, they're all smoking. Did this rail company say, you guys, you women, stop smoking in our work environment? They were smoking, like, they were able to smoke there, weren't they, out in the yards and things?
Absolutely. There's no, so yeah, I mean, it was a periphery issue where we brought up the fact that, look, there's exposure to cigarette smoke regardless of whether Rock was smoking, because it's all over. It's kind of intrinsic in this industry. It's part of the culture to a certain point. And again, there's no judgments on that. It's just a fact. You can't get away from the fact that most rail workers smoke.
Are smoking. So let's move on now. You told us a little bit about Rock Redmond. Tell us about him. Tell us about him, his family. Give us some of that background that you were handed, and you had to work with in order to get up in front of a jury and try this case. So let's hear from you about that. Like, tell us about the Redmonds.
So Rock, and first of all, you can't ask for a better name than Rock Redford. His, he.
I'm sorry, I said Redmond. I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's so Randall's his name. He was known from an early age from his parents as Rock, and so you can't get better than being the Rock.
Hey, also as a trial lawyer, it's good when you have a client named Rock.
Absolutely. So as you can imagine, I built a theme around the fact that he was the rock of this family. He was the bedrock of everything that happened around him. His coworkers felt that way. His family felt that way, and it was just he was a special guy. He was a special person that didn't deserve what ultimately happened to him. He worked for 38 years for Norfolk Southern. As what's called a maintenance of way worker, which is essentially, in some ways, building the tracks, but also more maintaining the tracks. Because when you think about the thousands and thousands of miles of tracks around the country, there are people there on a daily basis that are actually maintaining those and fixing them, making sure that there's nothing wrong with them. He worked over a very specific period of time where, as you alluded to earlier, Hunter, it went from things being done by hand to things being done by machine. And he was, kind of one of the people that was watching that crossover during that time. The problem was he was around, both by hand, whether it was by creosote, because he testified about placing these rail ties with creosote all over them that was actually burning, because it's something that, it's an exposure you don't want to touch with your hands if you can help it, but it's like a tar-like thing, and it gets on your skin and it kind of burns. So we would place it during his early time when he was there. And then over time, it became where there was more and more diesel machines around him. So when we're talking about diesel exhaust, I'm sure that most people think, the exposure from the engine of the train. There was an aspect of that because he was required to what we call deadhead, meaning he would get on a train and ride from one location to another, and he would be in areas where he was being hit by the exhaust from the engine over and over again, and that's a component. But frankly, most of this had to do with him being in proximity to all these machines that were working on the maintenance of way for the rail.
Like the payloaders, the little cranes, even the electric generators they probably had around to help them when they were out in rural areas, I'm sure. Everything is an engine with exhaust fumes.
Absolutely. And so, and you can imagine people watching this, you just think of that black cloud that's coming out of those machines. It doesn't seem too significant if you're just walking by it, but if you're working in proximity to that for an 8-hour day, overtime at times at 12 hours, that's something you're breathing in.
5 days a week.
5 days a week.
50, probably only gets 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off a year.
Absolutely.
48, 49 weeks a year doing this for 38 years.
And that adds up. And so when you get through that and understand how much he actually breathed into his lungs, that was poison that he was bringing in every single time. This particular company had trained their people on respirators, but they never provided them. And that's amazing to me.
It's this, when you say something like that, I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in a case where the whole claim, the claim surrounds providing safety equipment for workers. And their defense is, oh, yeah, we had a program. And we made sure everyone did the program. But then you ask the follow-up question, so did you give it to them? Did you give the equipment? Where was the equipment? Oh, we had it. Where was it? Oh, it was in a yard. Well, is the yard where they were working? No. They had to go there and requisition them and get them. So when were they supposed to do that? Before work? After work? I can only imagine,
Right.
them getting up and saying, yeah, we trained them, but we just didn't give it to them.
Absolutely, and the other thing I would say to people watching this, so they understand, it's not even just a situation of whether it's available or not. The companies oftentimes will foster a community where it's almost like it's discouraged to go use things like that, even though they might quote unquote be available. They already are saying, but you really don't want to use that. It's gonna cut down on your productivity. It's gonna make things more difficult for you. I can't tell you how many times they brought up the fact that, well, respirators are difficult because a lot of people on the rail have beards, and so as a result of that, we don't want that.
Okay, so you don't provide them a piece of safety equipment because they have a beard, as opposed to saying, well, you should trim your beard and wear this.
Absolutely.
And it's a requirement of your job.
Right. And maybe even educate the workers on, hey, here's the reason why we want this. That's never a concern. It's always like, this is available, but you don't need to worry about it. Because at the same time, they're providing these respirators that don't ever show up. They're also telling them, but diesel exhaust isn't a problem. You shouldn't worry about this.
And that, you have to realize, I'm sure a lot of these workers have that macho kind of manly, this is hard work. And I could picture, if you're just giving them a little bit of fuel to say, it's really not that bad, they're going to take the position, it's not that bad.
Absolutely.
In fact, I don't need this.
Absolutely.
And then they could turn around and say, well, it's your own fault, which is probably what they did here.
Oh, absolutely. So with Rock, what they did is they blamed it on cigarettes. They said, you smoked, and it was as simple as that. You smoked for 40 years, you smoked 1 to 2 packs a day, and as a result of that, your acute myeloid leukemia, which is a type of leukemia that is very fatal, unfortunately, and it just requires a lot of nasty treatment, and Rock had to go through all of that. They said your AML is your fault because you smoked. Nothing to do with all the substances we exposed you to, nothing to do with anything that our company did or did not do. And they defended the case on that.
Now, something pops in my head as you're telling me the story or telling us the story. There's something called workers' compensation. Let's assume, forget about the cigarette smoking. Let's keep that out for a second. Let's assume that Rock developed his cancer because of the exposure to these chemicals, whether it was the chemicals alone, whether it was the chemicals in combination with his long history of smoking, which it most likely was.
Sure.
What about workers' compensation? We have programs that pay for that. You continue to get your medical care. You get a check. I mean, why a lawsuit? I don't understand this.
So that gets back to the heart of what FELA is. Workers' compensation certainly is something that's available and generally used more in circumstances where you're talking about someone that has an injury on work site. Maybe they hit their hand as they're installing one of the rail ties, something like that. That's something that is your traditional kind of workers' compensation case. As a premise, you're not going to see them paying for. I mean, they fought us in the lawsuit, so they're certainly not going to pay something like AML in a workers' compensation case. But foremost, the damages model that you can, and when I say damages model, what I mean, what you can actually recover is
when you
much
say
higher.
recover, what a jury can give you in terms of money, because that's
Right.
all we can do in a courtroom.
Exactly.
So.
I mean, there wasn't a person in that courtroom that wouldn't have preferred that Rock come back, be able to enjoy his retirement without having any sort of cancer. We'd all love that.
Unfortunately, he wasn't there at the time of trial, correct?
No, he had passed by that point, and he only was able to testify through video and honestly through his wife Angie, who was one of the strongest people I've seen testify in a case. She was there for her family. She was there despite the fact that it was terrifying to her and it was so hard, but to see the strength that she had up on stand was truly amazing. But to your point, Rock wasn't able to be there, and we would have certainly preferred that to be the case, that he could have been there and never had the cancer. We're not able to wave our magic wand and make that happen. We'd love to as trial attorneys, but we can't do that. What we can do is talk to a jury of their peers, of everybody's peers, about what is this worth to this family? What can we do to try to do our best to make them whole? FELA gives us avenues that workers' compensation could only dream of.
Focusing on Rock and his work life, just take us through that for just a short bit, and how he ended up, like, what was what was he doing? What type of job was he doing over those various years? I'm sure he didn't do the exact same thing every day for every year. Tell us a little bit about that, and how that then played into the ultimate diagnosis of cancer that he was that he suffered from.
Absolutely. So Rock, he got his high school diploma on a Thursday, and he started work for Norfolk Southern on a Friday. He literally basically left the graduation ceremony and went over to Norfolk Southern at that time. That was something that was typical of the area of Virginia that he lived in. There were a lot of people in that town that also worked for the railroad. There were people whose fathers and grandfathers had also worked on the railroad, and that was typical of how they handled themselves. He was hired initially as a maintenance of way worker. That was his title the entire way through, but as you alluded to, his responsibilities changed, substantially over time. At the beginning, like I said, he was working directly with rail ties, placing them, hammering them in, like the old John Henry, poem where he's, big sledgehammer hammering them in. And then over time, he would be on driving payloaders and other sorts of equipment.
And right there was the exposure to all that diesel and
Yeah.
the diesel fuel and the diesel fumes.
Absolutely, and there was a 1 year period where the vehicle that he was driving in this arena had a cab that basically was just exposing the fumes right to him directly in the cab. It was leaking into the cab the entire time. He told the people several times.
Let me get this straight. So they pointed their finger at him smoking cigarettes, yet they locked him in a box in a payloader that was leaking diesel fume into the cab.
Absolutely.
And that didn't have anything to do with this.
No, that
Okay.
by their story.
Yeah, by their story. I mean,
That
I
had
should've
nothing to
said
do with it. No, it was all cigarettes that caused Mr. Redford's cancer, not the fact that he had complained about this setup multiple times over the course of it. But again, it wasn't remedied, and it was something that the rails tend to think these kind of complaints don't need to be addressed.
It's interesting. This kind of reminds me of the asbestos litigation arena, where the nerve of them, but the asbestos defendants would say, had nothing to do with your breathing in asbestos all day long. You smoked a cigarette, a couple of cigarettes every day. It's your cigarette smoking.
Absolutely.
So it's always look for another excuse to push the blame onto something else, not me. And in this case, let's talk about Rock and how you tried the case. Did you ever get up there and say, Rock's cigarette smoking has nothing to do with this? It's all their fault.
No, never.
Why? I mean, first of all, I could probably answer the question. It's rhetorical, but
Yeah.
Why? Tell us.
So when you're talking to a jury, and those of us that try cases understand this, the most important thing is credibility with the jury. They need to understand that I'm there to tell them the truth. And the defendants, in this case, decided that they wanted to take a different tact. I'm not going
That's
to
a nice way of saying they weren't telling the truth.
That's a different way of spilling the truth, I guess, for them. But they decided they were going to take zero blame.
Or is it called alternative facts?
Alternative facts, I think is what we call them nowadays. But in their regard, they decided they didn't want to invite any sort of a verdict against them, and they were not going to ever say they did anything wrong, no matter what we presented as far as the evidence we discussed. I don't think it's genuine for us to be able to say that some of the things that any of us have done in our lives wouldn't contribute in some level to some of these issues. You can't. So as we got into the science, and the science is fairly gnarly on these issues, meaning that there's a lot of noise out there, and you have to really dig down to the actual root science. And frankly, juries have a tough time taking that in. So you've got to be careful about how you present it and make sure that you can do the best you can to allow them to see the facts. But in this instance, there's zero question that cigarettes do have some association with acute myeloid leukemia. There's also zero question that diesel exhaust through benzene, which is ultimately a benzene exposure, also has an association with acute myeloid leukemia. So it would be less than truthful if I went to a jury and tried to say that this thing that the literature says causes AML is the culprit, but this one's not.
Is the only culprit.
Yes.
Okay. So if he had been exposed to some other capacity to a chemical or a pathogen that could cause this AML, you would have had to admit that as well, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Because that's the truth.
Yeah. Because I know this again as a mentor. What I've gotten to see you try cases, Hunter, and how I've always handled myself. I want that jury to understand that I'm there to tell the truth. I'm there to make sure that they understand the actual evidence as it exists and make a decision based upon that.
Whether it's the decision I want or the decision the other side want, they have to come up with the right decision and the fair one and the just one. Correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what our system's set up for, and to game it otherwise is not what we do.
Now, when we're looking at this case from the perspective of Norfolk Southern, or actually, it's not just Norfolk Southern; it's the industry, isn't it? This is not specific to this one railroad. Am I correct?
No, you're absolutely correct. It's so much of the evidence that we presented. So, for instance, the rails have a lot of groups where all of the railroads are part of it, and they get together. They, frankly, for lack of a better way of saying it, cook some of the science. They like to get their own studies and fund them themselves, and that's what they like to argue.
We see that in all the industries now.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, that's if in the old days we didn't realize it.
Yeah.
Today we know it. So.
But that said, going back to 1952, the industry understood that diesel exhaust was something that was a carcinogen, and they didn't like to talk about that in the courtroom for the Redfords. But that's something that was at least recognized in part at that point, and it's recognized industry-wide, and it's a problem industry-wide.
Now you're getting to the point I really want us to focus on and let the audience, get a feel for. We can drive in any state, go across any state in the United States. There are railroads, there's crossings, there's trains everywhere. Multiple railroad companies, huge railroad companies. Are you suggesting that every worker that works in that field for these railroads, whether it's Norfolk Southern or, I don't know, I'm thinking of Monopoly, the Reading Railroad, whatever, every one of these employees who are in that type of capacity, may have been 20, 30 years doing it, are at risk for developing diseases like this AML or other cancers?
Absolutely. You have to look at your lifetime exposures and what you're doing. If you're in this industry, you would be exposed to some of these chemicals regardless of what you were doing. Frankly, I'm aware of people that were doing more clerical work, but they were working in the roundhouse.
Roundhouse being
where the engine actually comes
turned
around.
around.
Turn it around.
Yep. The turntable.
Yeah, but the turntable that we've all seen. And in those instances, the engine's coming in and it's just spewing the exhaust into that area, and it gets on a day.
It's going right into the secretary or the boss's office.
Absolutely.
And they're getting fumigated, basically.
Absolutely. So even if you weren't a worker that was directly working on the rails, you were involved in this because it's around you at all times. They would say that we walk down the street and have more exposure to these things. Our jury here disagreed.
I mean, it's an easy defense to say that, but I'd rather be out in the fresh air with some exhaust fumes going by than being in my office, being pumped full of diesel fumes. So I mean that
absolutely.
I mean it's just a crazy defense. But in terms of the industry, in terms of all these railroads, and all these workers that are out there, whether they're retired now, still working for them, these are all potential victims of this. They could be developing these cancers because of the work they did to support their families and to have their lives? Is that what they had to trade off?
Absolutely. There's no question about the fact that this is something that is a trade-off is a great way to put it, because they oftentimes feel like they are freely giving that they need to give those things. There's going to be health concerns that they have as a result of working on the rail, and that's just something that just comes with the territory. But that gets back to the point of what FELA is. It's not supposed to be part of the territory. And what they need to understand, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on science here, but just for people to understand, there's what's called a latency period between a lot of these cancers. So it's not something that appears right away after you're exposed to something. It's something that kind of builds in your body over time. So you're going to see with a lot of these cancers that you don't get the actual cancer, whether it's lung cancer, AML, some of the others, for 25, 30, whatever the year is from your first exposure.
I've tried some of these cases where the defense expert says it couldn't be caused by this because it hasn't been 25 years
Absolutely.
since the exposure.
Right, and they will argue that if they can.
If that's their only defense.
Right, absolutely. And with some cancers, it all depends on the exposures. You got to look at what it is that's being exposed to. There's things that are worse than diesel exhaust that these workers were exposed to as well. That wasn't the case with rock, but there are other exposures. For instance, you said if you're exposed to pure benzene and inhaling that on a regular basis, that can be something that can cause problems a lot quicker.
You're the mechanic who's actually sitting inside the maintenance shed,
right?
And you're cleaning the tools, you're cleaning the equipment, and you're using acetones and benzenes to get the grease off so you can do your job. That's direct exposure. Correct?
Absolutely.
And those employees, those former employees, current employees, they're diagnosed with certain cancers. There's probably no question that it's tied to those exposures. Whether or not they're smokers, whether or not their parents smoke and they had secondhand smoke in their house, they're probably exposed to that chemical is one of the main causes, or at least one of the substantial contributing factors to the cancer, correct?
Absolutely. And so at the end of the day, we're talking about an instance, because Rock, again, great person, great father, great husband, but did smoke quite a bit. And so most of the time you're talking about a circumstance where people are smoking, at least at that level or less. But even if you smoked more than that, that still would have been something that caused Rock's cancer, what he was exposed to in this. And so for workers, for other people that are part of the rail, they need to understand that they've been exposed to these things, and they shouldn't diminish and take personal responsibility solely to say it was my fault for smoking, because the rail is certainly not taking personal responsibility for their part.
Well, I think it gets even more ominous, or it's even deeper than that. It's the fact that people don't know. They don't think that, the first thing you think of when you go to the doctor is, and he says you have a disease like, you have cancer, is you're not thinking, did I get it because I was working at the railroad? They're thinking about cure, they're thinking about their lives, they're thinking about their families. I think the one thing I see from this, because you don't hear of a lot of these cases, do you think it's because the actual railroad employees and their family members just don't know? They don't know that these diseases they're being diagnosed with are more likely than not tied to their exposures at work.
Yes, I don't think there's a question about that. I think that your point on treatment is apropos, because oncologists, when you go to see an oncologist and you have one of these cancers, they're not going to sit there and say, well, this is why you got this cancer. That's not their place. They're trying to save your life at that point. They're just trying to make sure that the treatment is appropriate for what they need to do to try to do the best for you. And I talk to oncologists over and over again, because in these cases, defendants like to call the oncologist and say, well, did you say that this is what caused it? And they always say, I was focused on saving a life. That's not what I do. And that's the reason why it's important that you have to be proactive and understand that this is something that was caused by something that someone else did in this regard. I think in this area that a lot of people that work in the rail industry, like I've said a couple times, have a tendency to think, well, this is just things that happen to people like me. And that's exactly the mindset we need to get out of. We need to understand.
We used to see that with people working in the auto industry and their exposures there, and in the airline industry, in the maintenance area. This is just nature of, or in the oil industry, this is the nature of my job. It comes with the job. But I assume now, after hearing what you're saying, the whole purpose of FELA is so that you don't assume this is an element of my job. What you should be able to assume is that they're going to provide you with the safe environment so you don't get these exposures.
No question. And that's what I would hope people would take away from this, because I know that you and I would love to be able to help as many of them as we possibly can, because without those like us, the industry is not going to do anything.
Now, the jury in this case, they found in favor of Rock's family. Am I correct?
That's right.
And that was a substantial verdict, $21+ million.
$21.8 million, yes.
And I'm sure the family was just shocked when that happened. Happy but shocked.
It was amazing to see Angie go through kind of the myriad of emotions that she got through. Shock was certainly the first one, but money was really not the issue for her, as it is isn't for most people.
It wasn't going to bring her husband back. We know that.
But ultimately, when she left and she gave me a big hug when we were kind of leaving Norfolk, she just said, "Thank you for doing this for Rock. Thank you for remembering him and making someone accountable for what happened to him." And that's really at the heart of it, why we do what we do.
And I think it's important for us to get across to the audience and the people listening here. This could be happening to you or a family member or a friend, but you may not even know about it. And I think it's why it's important to do these type of discussions and get the word out, because I can only imagine how your verdict rocked the corporate board at Norfolk Southern. And that's what I'd like to go into next. What's your thoughts? I mean, when you have a railroad now that has a worker that they were brushing off as saying he's a no-good smoker and it's all his fault, and to wake up the next day and have to sit down with the board and say a jury came in at $21.8 million for us failing to provide a safe environment to our smoker employee. I mean, that's gotta cause a little bit of an earthquake inside the boardroom, because they're starting to realize we have an awful lot of those employees out there probably.
No, I think that last part is exactly the issue. They had corporate reps at the trial that were observing. I can tell you that they didn't seem very happy at the end of the trial. But
weren't happy at any point during the trial.
Probably not. But they. There's no question that this kind of reverberated not just through Norfolk Southern, but also through other railroads.
That was going to be my next question to you. What do you think it did to the boardrooms of those other railroads? I
think there's a lot of questions of how many Rock Redfords do we have out there, and what can we do to maybe do this differently next time, now going forward. But that can't change what happens, going back to 1965, 1970, 1975. I mean, the workers that we're talking about right now have maybe recently retired, are all exposed to these same things.
I'm thinking how many of, guys my age, friends that I grew up with, who went into jobs like this, and they're just retiring. I've luckily been in an office setting, in a courtroom, but they've been in the, in the pit. They're retiring now, or in the last couple of years, or in a couple of years from now, and think about how many tens of thousands of individuals, and not just those workers on the ground, even those people in the clerical offices who are exposed in every one of those companies. I mean, I think that's what these companies have to wake up and realize is coming. There's a tidal wave. And I think it's important for anyone, and I think you'd agree with me, anyone who knows someone who worked in that industry who develops a cancer of these types, they should be thinking about this, right?
Absolutely. So what I want this to do, and why we do things like this, this podcast, is we want people to understand what's out there and to get the word out. I'm not saying that every single cancer that is caused is caused by these substances, but there is evidence to show that certain cancers are, and they're more prevalent because when you're exposed to these types of materials, you're going to get those types.
So we're hearing
cancers.
Like leukemias, the lymphomas, the blood cancers, many of those, the lung cancers.
Lung cancer, exactly.
I mean, these are the type of diseases that we see associated with these chemicals. Am I correct?
Yes. And so what I want is for there to be not a mindset of this is just what happens to me in this industry. I want there to be a mindset of what can I proactively do to make sure this doesn't happen to others and that my family can be taken care of.
And I mean, I think that the greatest part of your verdict, or the I should say Rock's verdict, was that his family is going to be taken care of. I mean, that's the goal here, isn't it? For every one of these people we represent.
Yeah, there's no question that what we're doing, again, if we could bring people back, we would. If we could change the health outcomes, we would. That's not an option for any of us. But our legal system is set up to try to hold defendants accountable when they cause injuries like this. And for the Redfords, for Angie, for their family, this is, I think, something that's going to make them as whole as we're able to.
And I think there's a second thing that most people don't realize, because there's a lot of, people hear verdicts, big verdicts, like, so what? It only helps one person. But what's your thoughts about how it affects going forward? And we talked about the boards. I mean, isn't this the kind of wake-up calls where they say maybe we should start enforcing some of these safety regulations? Maybe we should start making sure they wear better protective devices. I think of, we handled the 9/11 exposure cases at the firm, and the defense was, well, we gave them paper masks. Well, paper masks don't stop these carcinogens from getting into your lungs. So I think you should be happy. Another thing came out of this is that maybe from this verdict and what you did for Rock's family, it will help other workers in the future not to have this type of disease happen to them. Because maybe the companies will wake up and say it's cheaper to give proper safety to our employees rather than pay big verdicts decades down the road.
I do think that unfortunately it takes verdicts in order to change behavior in the industry because they're profit-minded. I'm not going to go so far as to say they don't care about people at all, but I am going to say that they don't care enough about people to enforce their safety rules in such a manner that they keep them safe. And that's really the rub here. I do hope it's a wake-up call. I do think that those boardrooms are talking about things like this, and ultimately, whether it's because they want to do the right thing, which I'm a little bit cynical on
we
that.
Hope.
Yeah.
We hope.
But for them, money talks, and for them, verdicts talk, and for them, the Rock Redfords talk, and that's what I think we did here is Rock got a final say on this one.
What I think is important to take away here is that this is not just, a FELA railroad worker issue. There are many other industries where safety is not number one for the employer, and unfortunately the workers suffer from it. This FELA doesn't just apply in railroads. It can be in other federally protected type of work areas. Am I correct?
Yes, it's incredibly important to understand that there's other areas that are protected, and that you should be contacting, someone that us preferably to discuss whether or not it could apply. There's other statutory constructs like the Jones Act that talk about
If you're in the shipping.
similar, in the shipping. So there's ways to find out if you're protected if you have these types of exposures and these types of injuries.
It's interesting you bring up the Jones Act. Early in my career, I did a lot of those cases, and it was mostly the ship worker who gets physically hurt, from doing something on the boat out at sea, and the like. But I think maybe we're going to be seeing a lot of these types of cases as well, because the same solvents, the same chemicals, the diesel. I mean, they're working in those boats day and night, and I'm quite sure some of the older ships don't exhaust as well as they could. So you're talking about even workers in the maritime industry that could be developing these types of cancers and also at this type of risk. And the family should be considering that as well if this happens. Am I right?
Yes, I think that if you're in an industry where there's exposures to these types of substances as part of your work, it's worthwhile to reach out to find out if you have an injury. Now, if there's no injury, I'm not saying everybody that's exposed does ultimately get these cancers, the risk is that it's substantially higher. And as a result, if you have those cancers or you have injuries that you believe are related to those substances, you should reach out and find out if there's protections in place.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Chris, for coming down here and to join us on the docket here. We like to do these, and this was such really an important topic to cover. And your success here was, I mean, you knocked it out of the park. Great work. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. And please tune in to our podcast. These topics are important to the average person out there. You know, what we're seeing here is that, you know, the workers of America are often trusting their employers to provide them a safe environment, and they're just failing. And with actions like these under the FELA and Jones Act, there is a way to get compensation for your family. Thank you very much, Chris. Look forward to doing it again.
Thanks, Hunter.